Hey there, welcome back to Lima Bean Living. In today's video, I am going to be walking you through the recipe and the tutorial for how to make this geode cake. I made it for my daughter's second birthday party, and it was my first time ever trying this recipe for both the frosting and the cake, as well as decorating in this particular style. So if you like what you see and want to make it for yourself, keep watching. So the first thing you are going to want to do is butter and flour your cake pans. You want to make sure the entire pan, even the edges, is covered with butter, and then sprinkle on your flour and just make sure it is thoroughly coated. Next, we are going to preheat the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And this recipe calls for 1 2/3 cups of flour, 1 cup of sugar, 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 1/2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 3/4 cup of unsalted butter at room temperature, 3 eggs at room temperature, 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract, 1/4 cup of sour cream room temperature, and 1/2 cup of milk room temperature. Now I will go ahead and also include all of the information you need in the description box below for some easy referrals here. But what you want to start doing is sift the flour, salt, baking soda, and baking powder together in a large bowl. And then you're going to want to separate the egg whites and the yolks. Now, this is just a technique that I picked up in previous baking attempts, and I really liked how the final result turned out, so I thought I would give this technique a try with this cake. So the yolks are actually going to be combined with 1/2 cup of the sugar until it's pale. So we're using 1/2 of the sugar with the yolks, and then we're eventually going to use 1/2 of the sugar with the egg whites. So again, you're going to beat the yolks with 1/2 cup of sugar until it's pale, and then we're going to add in the sour cream, milk, butter, and vanilla. Now, I was mixing this and it kind of resembled cottage cheese. I thought it looked a little weird, but then we are going to add in the dry ingredients into this mixture, and as you add in those little by little, it becomes more of a cake batter like mixture. So don't freak out if you think it looks kind of lumpy and curdled. It ends up being perfectly fine after you add in the dry ingredients. With the egg whites, we are going to whip these with a whisk until foamy, and then we're going to add in the remaining 1/2 cup of sugar gradually until stiff peaks form. Now, if you have a stand mixer, you could probably be doing this as you are mixing up the other ingredients, or if you don't have, separate mixers, this can take place after or before the previous step. Once you have this egg white mixture, you're going to fold it into the batter that you've made previously, and then divide the mixture evenly into the cake pans. I like to use a kitchen scale to measure for even layers to make sure that they're pretty much identical, and I found that each cake came out to be about 472 grams each. Once the batter was in the cake pans evenly divided, I kind of wiggled the pan side to side, spreading out the batter, and then dropped it on the countertop a couple times to just kind of get all the air bubbles out and level out the batter before throwing it in the oven. We are going to bake these for 30 minutes or until the centers are set and springy, and then we're going to let the layers cool in the pans for about 2 minutes and then invert them on a cooling rack. So here you are seeing me kind of upset because I originally thought this cake would come out a little bit taller for each level, and I thought I was going to be able to cut each of these cakes in half and end up having 4 layers. These cakes were probably about 1 inch tall after they cooled, and I realized that just wasn't going to cut it. It wasn't going to result in a cake as tall as I wanted. So I ended up making an entirely separate batch of cake, which didn't end up being a big deal. It actually ended up working out. I was wanting to put food coloring in the first batch and forgot, so I figured I would make this one a little pink. And you want to make sure if you're adding food coloring, you want to add in more than you think you're going to need, because typically the cakes will become more pale as they bake. So if you want it really, really red, you're gonna have to add a whole lot more food coloring than I did. So it wasn't the end of the world. I kind of wish I would have thought of making a double batch at the beginning. So keep that in mind if you guys are doing this for yourself. If you want a 2-layer 9-inch round cake, making one batch of this cake will do. But if you want 4 layers and then probably about 6 to 7 inches high of a cake, go ahead and double this recipe. The next thing I did was make a simple syrup. This is just equal parts sugar and water. I think I did about a half cup of each, and boiled the mixture for just maybe like a minute or two and then let it cool. And then we're gonna take the simple syrup and just kind of coat our cakes. I had enough to coat both sides of the 4 cakes, and this really doesn't add much flavor, but it really does keep the moisture in the cake. And because I was making my cakes days before the party, I really wanted to make sure that they didn't dry out. If you are making a cake for, just dessert later on, you probably can skip this step, but I do think that it really paid off for me, at least in my situation. Once all 4 cakes were totally coated in the simple syrup, I just wrapped them up in saran wrap and threw them in the freezer. And we're gonna just leave those in the freezer until the night before the party, and that was when I was gonna be assembling my cake. So the next thing I'm gonna be doing is preparing the filling for the cake. Originally, I was thinking I would have some fresh strawberries, but I ended up changing my mind and cutting up the strawberries and sprinkling on some just regular white granulated sugar to kind of give them a sweeter taste and to kind of create a strawberry syrup, which I would also use in my buttercream later on. So that was a kind of a decision on my part that was a last minute one, but I think it ended up paying off. So just to reiterate, I cut up all of these strawberries. I can't say I remember how much, but it was a good amount of strawberries, and into thin slices, and then I sprinkled on the sugar kind of layer by layer so that all of the strawberries would come in contact with the sugar. Put a lid on my container and let it sit in the fridge for at least a day or 2. Then on another day, I decided to make the buttercream for this cake. To make this buttercream, which was enough to cover the entire 4-layer cake, so you're probably gonna want to half this recipe if you are only making 1 batch of the cake batter. But this recipe calls for 2 1/4 cups of unsalted butter. You're also gonna need 1 14-ounce can of sweetened condensed milk, 1 7-ounce jar of marshmallow fluff, and then I will describe how I added the strawberry flavor as we go along. So the first thing you want to do is add your butter to a stand mixer. Ideally, if you don't have one, you can do this by hand with a hand mixer. It's just gonna kind of take up all of your time because you're gonna be standing there. You want to whip your butter for at least 5 minutes. You want it to become pale and like very light in color. Since I have a stand mixer, I just kind of set that aside and worked on the flavoring portions. So I brought out my strawberries that I had prepared previously and drained off most of the syrup that it formed naturally, and then portioned out just a few strawberries to blend up. And then I pushed this mixture through a sieve and just kind of got out all the juice and separated the seeds because I did not want that in a smooth buttercream. Once I had completed that step, I went back and checked on my butter, and it was now a very light color. I wiped down the sides and made sure to whip it just a little bit longer to make sure everything got thoroughly mixed in. And then we are going to add in our sweetened condensed milk. Now, a lot of buttercream recipes you can add in powdered sugar, and I've done that in the past. So adding sweetened condensed milk was a different experience for me. It was something new, and I figured I would give it a try. And I think it turned out pretty well. I unfortunately didn't taste test just the butter and the sweetened condensed milk, and I wish I would have, because apparently that is one method of making just a basic buttercream. You probably could add some vanilla and just use that for some frosting. But because I wanted to go with a strawberry feel and a marshmallow fluff feel, those were some extra steps, and I just didn't taste the basic recipe for this sweetened condensed milk buttercream. But keep that in mind, that is an option for future cakes. Then I added in the marshmallow fluff and gave that a good whip, and finally added in my strawberry kind of syrup. Some people I've seen kind of cook this on the stove, probably to reduce it down a little bit. That was a step that I decided to skip, and I think it turned out okay on my end. As you're whipping at first, adding in this liquid, it makes it kind of a little nerve-wracking. It starts to look like it's curdling up a little bit, but then once it gets well incorporated, you have a very smooth and fluffy buttercream. I packaged this up in a container because I wasn't going to be decorating my cake right away, and threw this in the fridge. So to assemble this geode cake, I have seen some people just decorate the entire round cake by itself and then trim off a portion for the geode look. But because I didn't want to waste any of my filling, I decided to give the cake a cut first before filling in with frosting and the layers and all of that. So I just kind of cut out a little wedge from my cake, and then I just kind of put the scraps aside for me and my family to have a little deconstructed cake taste test later on. And then once I kind of had it the way I liked, I set the cakes aside, scooped off the little portions to give to my mom because that's one of her favorite parts, and then layered the plate that the cake was going to be on with some parchment paper around the edges so that I could take them off and have a clean plate once I was done decorating the cake. Then I thought I would give my buttercream a quick whip since it was in the fridge for a while, and I had a pretty big scare. I remember this is the day of the party, and this buttercream was curdled. As I was whipping it, I was just kind of freaking out because I was like, this looks like cottage cheese. This does not look like the smooth buttercream that I made just like a few days before. And my gut reaction was, oh my gosh, it's, the butter's melting. I need to put it back in the fridge. But I did a quick little search on YouTube, and actually it turns out that if your buttercream is kind of curdled like this, it actually needs heat, which I thought was really odd. So I trusted it because I am nowhere near a professional, and had my brother help me by holding a little hair dryer as I continued to whip this buttercream, and it actually solved the problem. So keep that in mind, learn from my mistake. If your buttercream is just too cold, it's going to curdle, and you're actually going to have to heat it up to get that smooth finish. So once we got that figured out, I went ahead and assembled my cake. I did a nice thick layer around the edge of the cake, and then did a smaller layer kind of on the inside. I mainly wanted to create a little ridge so that my filling wouldn't spill out the sides, but that there was still frosting on each layer as well. So as I'm decorating here, I am going to quickly explain why I decided to save this step until the day of the party. Our refrigerator was pretty stocked with all of the fresh fruits and stuff that we were going to be serving that day, and so there really wasn't any space to store a fully decorated cake until the day of the party when all of the food was now out of the refrigerator. So I defrosted the cakes that I had individually wrapped the night before in the fridge, took them out the morning of, and by the time I was ready to assemble this cake, the cakes were defrosted and it worked out perfectly. Once the entire cake was assembled with the strawberry centers and the strawberry buttercream frosting fillings, I went ahead and gave this cake a crumb coat. Now, for those of you guys who don't know what that is, this is just a very thin layer of buttercream frosting that goes around the entire cake, and then we throw that in the fridge to kind of firm up. And this just kind of keeps the crumbs kind of stuck to that portion of the cake so that when you add on your outer layer of frosting, you don't have crumbs kind of floating in and getting everywhere and making it really ugly. So as the cake was in the fridge, I prepared some of the little candied rocks that I was going to use to create the geode look. I had this pack from Michael's, and I wanted to give some of the rocks a darker red look, so I just threw them in with some red food coloring and mixed them around and kind of created an ombre effect with these candied rocks. And I also used some sugar crystals that I made, and I made this in a previous video, so I will link that above if any of you guys want to know how to make these sugar crystals. So once all of the rocks were prepared for the geode creation, the cake was ready to do the final frosting coat. And I didn't have any special tools, you guys. I just pretty much used a long, like, bread serrated knife to spread the frosting around and smooth out the edges, and that ended up working for me. So don't feel like you need to go buy some expensive cake decorating set to create something like this. Again, I used a bread knife. So work with what you got, and in the end, what really matters is that your kiddos know that they are loved. I just piped on a nice thick layer of frosting around the side and smoothed it out with my knife, kind of filling in the little missing frosting areas with some additional frosting, and just continue to smooth it away until I was happy with the final look. One technique that you might find helpful is to clean off your knife or your just flat surface, I guess, your scraper, whatever you are using. After each little swipe of the frosting. This will help make sure that you don't make something bumpy or add frosting where you didn't want to add frosting, and it will just help you in the long run get that nice smooth buttercream finish. Once the outer coating was done, I just went ahead and put some extra frosting in the crater for the geode and just kind of worked from the inside out with my darkest candy stones first, and then building out to my light pink sugar crystals, again, that I made in a previous video. One style that I've seen many people do is use some edible gold paint to kind of paint around the rim of these geode rocks, but I didn't have that, so I thought I would use some of these red sugar crystals that I had bought from Michael's. And in the end, I think this ended up looking pretty close to my inspiration photo that I found on Pinterest, and I was happy with the final result. I finished this cake off by adding a homemade cake topper, as well as some extra leftover candied rocks, and that was it. Instead of cutting this cake the traditional kind of wedge style, I tried a new technique, and it actually gave us a great view of what the inside of the cake looked like. Everyone had only good things to say about the cake, so I was really happy with how it turned out. The layers were like perfectly moist and delicious. I really hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you are new here, I would love for you to stick around and subscribe. I have a bunch of content, pretty much all things mom. This is actually a video in a little series that I did for my daughter's birthday party, so you can go ahead and check out those other videos if you want. And I just want to reiterate, this was my first time trying this recipe as well as this decoration style, so if I can do it, you guys can do it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It all is going to be eaten and digested anyways. So don't put too much pressure on yourself for the final end result. I know that there are areas that I could have improved, but the important part is that we try. Thanks again for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Woohoo! You've made it to the end of the video. If you didn't know already, my name is Emily from Lima Bean Living. Welcome. We are so happy to have you. We post videos every Monday and Friday on a variety of content: lifestyle, cooking, cleaning, military life, DIYs, encouraging mathematical development in children, and so much more. Thank you so much again for watching, and until next time.